Um, shall we start? I think we are a couple of minutes after the 8:30 starting time. And Muni, would you like to start, please?
Okay, thank you, Marita. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are participating from. My name is Muni Muniappan. I am the director of the IPM Innovation Lab. IPM Innovation Lab is one of the USAID funded programs, but it is managed by the Virginia Tech in US. IPM Innovation Lab has been participating in the international arena since 1993. We have participated in the past in about 30 different countries, but currently we are working only in 7 countries, 4 of them in Africa and 3 of them in Asia. In Africa, 3 of them in Africa and 4 of them in Asia. In Africa, we work in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. In Asia, we work in Nepal, Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Vietnam. In the IPM Innovation Lab, we develop IPM packages for the selected crops. They vary from cereals, vegetables, fruit crops to legumes. And we implement these IPM packages in the developing countries and also scale them up. In addition, we also monitor invasive species like the South American tomato leaf miner, Tuta absoluta, and the fall armyworm, and develop management technologies and introduce them in the host countries and also in other parts of the world. So we, in the IPM, chemical pesticide use is an integral part. We introduce physical control, chemical control, cultural control, host plant resistance, biological control, all these different methods of control for management of pests and diseases, but we integrate them so that it will be a package, a safe package that we could introduce to the developing countries without having any adverse impact. Of course, chemical pesticides play a major role in the IPM, but they do pose some hazards to the human and environmental health. So to safeguard that, we have been working with CNFA in arranging joint webinars on safe use pesticides. On October 29th, there was a webinar or the first part of this webinar. In that, we covered pesticide selection, pesticide labels, label information, pesticide formulations, mixing and loading, and also information on PERSWAPs. PERSWAP is a term used by the USAID. What it means is pesticide evaluation report and safe use action plan. So in this second part, the webinar will cover application, cleaning of the equipment, storage, re-entry intervals after spraying, pesticide residue, etc. So I welcome you all to the second part of this webinar. And without much delay, I'd like to pass on to Margaret Aileta to explain or introduce CNFA and also our presenter. Marietta?
Thank you very much. And good morning and afternoon and evening to all of you. And welcome to this second part of the training by Tim McCoy on the safe use of pesticides. I am Marietta Aileta. I am the program director for the Southern Africa Farmer to Farmer program, which is a USAID funded project that sends expert volunteers for short-term assignments in developing countries. We work currently in 5 countries in Southern Africa and also in Moldova, which is in Eastern Europe. Our volunteers provide training and technical support to diverse organizations, including farmer organizations, small and medium enterprises, agricultural universities and schools, ministries, and others. My colleagues who are also participating in this webinar and we work for CNFA, which is an NGO based in Washington, DC, and has almost 30 years of experience in implementing farmer-to-farmer programs. Currently, because of COVID, we have been focusing on remote assignments. And those are basically US-based volunteers providing technical support and training remotely to our beneficiaries in the focal countries. And this type of webinar on safe use of pesticides is also one of those remote assignments that we have been doing now during this unusual period. We are really excited to be collaborating with the IPM Innovation Lab on this topic, given the lab's long experience in integrated pest management. And we are very happy that many of you have come back after the first part of the training. And for those of you who did miss the first part of the training, do not worry, because we do have a recording of it. So please let us know if you would like to have that recording. Those recordings are made available for anyone. You are welcome to use them in your work and thereby kind of spread the message of this important topic of safe use of pesticides. And I think all of us who are participating in this webinar today many have encountered countless of examples of dangerous and unsafe use of pesticides. So this topic is really important. It is important for human health, and it is also important for environmental health. And I think we all learned a lot from the first part of this webinar, and we are really looking forward to this part 2. Thank you, Tim, very much for doing this, and thank you for the IPM Lab for the collaboration. Over to you, Tim.
Okay, you should have my video going. Okay, and I will share my screen and we will get into it. Okay, first I want to thank you all for taking your time to join us here this morning or evening, as Mooney said, wherever you are. And as Marietta said, this is the continuation of a 2-part series that it's our plan to edit this into one video presentation so that you are available to we can make it available to you to use however you need to. During the presentation, I encourage you to ask questions in the chat box. Instructions on how to do that are right there. But we will also have time for you to ask questions verbally at the end of the presentations, because I'd really like to have a bit of a discussion to find out about your specific challenges that you're dealing with. I've not had the opportunity yet to travel to Africa, and so some of what I'm saying is going to be, I hope to get the opportunity to come, and so I would love to hear your responses as to some of the specific challenges that I'm going to be talking about. So also, Marietta did mention it, but if you would take just a moment and enter in the chat box, tell us where you're viewing this from and your title, so that we can just capture that for our reporting records. And I would appreciate that. Okay. As I said, since this is the second part of this presentation, I'm going to just jump into this section of it. I'm going to talk for about 25-30 minutes, and then we'll have a brief discussion about this first presentation. And then I've got a very brief presentation on pesticide residues on vegetable crops post-harvest that I separated into a smaller presentation just because I think it's a very important topic, and I'd like to have some discussions with you all surrounding that. So I'll just get into, this is the second part of the elements of a good pesticide safety program. And this is, first we're going to be talking about reducing pesticide exposures during applications. And this is especially reducing pesticide exposures to the applicator. Now, during application, improper handling techniques can result in both acute and chronic pesticide exposures. The acute exposures are not as severe because they are much more severe when you're dealing with the concentrate. And now that the pesticide is in a more dilute form, it's safer than it was as the concentrate, but it's certainly not harmless. And applicators need to be aware of that and protect themselves from exposures to large volumes of the fluid that could make them very, very sick. The other one that is often overlooked is the chronic exposure. Exposure to small amounts of the pesticide over long periods of time that can add up and cause illness. And I always encourage my fellow educators to educate and encourage the farmers and applicators to think about the long-term future and what these exposures can add up to. And this is one of the reasons why they need to wear personal protective equipment and practice good application techniques to minimize, to as much as possible, their exposure to pesticides. So, oops. Okay. The best way to minimize exposure during application is wearing the proper PPE. Now, at a minimum, this should be long sleeve shirt, long sleeve pants, covered shoes, and gloves. This gentleman, I love his outfit. I wish he was wearing gloves, but it's the best picture I could find. The thing about gloves, and I've tried to emphasize this with my fellow educators and with the farmers, is that gloves not only protect you, but they set the standard. They get the applicator thinking, okay, now I'm doing the serious business of applying pesticides. I'm putting on my gloves and also taking off those gloves. It's a clear separation of job duties. And it makes it may seem like a small thing, but it actually does change the mindset of, okay, this is something serious. Oftentimes, though, personal protective equipment, it can be seen as an unnecessary expense or burden. Gloves, good quality, heavy-duty gloves that are going to last can be expensive, and I recognize that, and I don't want to pretend that that's not part of the equation. But as educators, we need to help the farmers, the applicators, understand that this expense is an investment in their future. By protecting themselves now, they're ensuring that they're going to be healthy in the future. But there's a lot of reasons people don't wear gloves. As I mentioned, the expense, they can be cumbersome, and oftentimes growers don't see the immediate benefit of them. But they can oftentimes, applicators complain that they're hot. And that's a legitimate concern, especially when your heat stress can mimic pesticide exposure and can really be a very taxing thing, even in relatively light heat stress conditions. And I want to differentiate between heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Heat exhaustion is a situation where the body is starting to become overheated. You can feel faint, dizzy, excessive sweating. You can even feel nausea. Probably most of us have had this experience, and it's relatively easy to treat just by cooling off, drinking water, and, you know, in severe cases, cool compresses and cool shower, just bringing the body temperature down. By contrast, heat stroke is a much more serious condition. This is when the body is heated so high that your temperature regulation system shuts down. Your body stops sweating and the body temperature can start to rise uncontrollably. And this is a life-threatening situation. The person needs to get emergency help immediately. And these situations can be compounded by wearing personal protective equipment because you're insulating, keeping that body heat in against the skin. And that's one of the reasons applicators push back on wearing PPE. But you can wear PPE and prevent heat stress. It's about educating the growers about what heat stress is and helping them understand how to manage it. Recognizing that it's not just the sun or high temperature, it's a combination often of high humidity, which insulates the body and keeps that heat in against the body. Low air movement, so there's less evaporation, so sweating stops working. And then, of course, direct sunlight does influence it. If you can encourage your applicators to adjust their workloads so that they're applying either early in the day or late in the afternoon, away from the hottest time of the day, always encourage them to drink lots of water to keep cooling themselves. And then schedule breaks. If they're treating a large piece of property, it may be best to work in shifts or to take breaks so that you can just take your PPE off, cool off, and then get back to it. But it's all part of encouraging applicators that PPE is just another part of their equipment. They wouldn't go into their field without their backpack sprayer. They wouldn't go out there with just a bucket and splash it around. The equipment, the PPE is part of that equipment. Now, reducing pesticide exposure during application also includes how they apply. The direction of application matters. Now, in all likelihood, this picture that I used before, this gentleman is walking this way in the picture. But ideally, if at all possible, applications should be made where you're more backing through the application site so that where you're spraying, you're not walking directly into. And that can help minimize the applicator's exposure. I understand that this is not always practical, especially when the ground is uneven and you may have a very heavy backpack, but ideally, if you can walk backwards and move away from the application site, that's safer. Ideally, making the application with the wind to your back. So again, that pesticide is being moved away from the body rather than up onto the applicator. And then not applying when the conditions are too windy and you've got swirling wind conditions that may bring that pesticide back onto the applicator, because even if they are wearing the appropriate PPE, likely their face and eyes are going to be exposed, and that's an area where they can absorb a lot of pesticides. Now, encourage your applicators not to eat, drink, especially don't smoke while making applications. This is, it does a couple of things. One, it brings the pesticides right in contact with the skin, especially if you're smoking, you can inhale pesticide residues. If you're eating or drinking, you can absorb that into your skin or possibly even ingest some of the residues. But this also helps set the tone of, as I said earlier, with donning your PPE, that this is the work portion, and then, you know, eating, smoking, using the toilet, those are separate, and you need to encourage them to separate those two and wash between eating and drinking or when they have to use the toilet, so that they get in they start practicing good habits of avoiding these residues. Now, equipment maintenance falls into this reducing exposures as well. If you can recognize small leaks and recognize that those can lead to exposures, not just to the applicator, but also can cost money as they can damage crops and the environment. Most often leaks occur at the nozzle body, often at the trigger body, and then at the pump connection. And all of these leaks in these areas can cost money in loss of product, harm crops as more pesticide is spilled onto the crops and can cause phytotoxicity issues or kill non-targets if the dose is too high. And of course can harm applicators. You can imagine if you've got a leak at the base of the pump and this is just trickling onto the applicator's pants, that's in contact with their skin and can actually lead to an acute reaction if they're absorbing enough during the application. And this is all the more reason to wear gloves during application, because even if there's a small leak at the trigger body, if you've got good chemically resistant gloves, that's not going to soak through and injure the applicator. Now, repairing these leaks sometimes can be quite simple, as tightening fittings, taping hoses, connection hoses, and especially replacing worn and damaged nozzles. I find that nozzle maintenance is, here in the States, it's often a problem where farmers will use nozzles beyond their usable life, and this changes the volume that is being put out and can also then cause leaks to run down the nozzle body and the arm to the applicator. The best time to discover leaks in your equipment is when you're calibrating your application equipment, because ostensibly your cleaned backpack sprayer you would fill that with water, and then you'd be applying just water. And so if you recognize leaks, that would be the best time to repair them when you're not having to deal with a pesticide. Now, about calibration, it can become quite complex, but ultimately it's a relatively simple process. Look to the pesticide label, and that's going to indicate your application rate for the given crop and the pest that you're trying to control. Then you want to choose your appropriate nozzle that is going to give you either precisely the volume that you're looking for, or very close to the volume that you're looking for in gallons per minute. Then you want to fill your sprayer with water, set the sprayer to your operating pressure, and then time how long it takes to fill a measured container, so that you can figure out how much volume per minute this nozzle at this pressure is delivering. And then you want to figure out how long it's going to take you to walk a certain distance. That can be 10 meters, just at your regular application pace. And then you have an idea of, okay, for this amount of time it takes me to walk this, and I know that this sprayer can deliver this volume over this period of time, you can calculate how much you're going to be putting out as you walk through your field. If you need to make small adjustments into how much, if you need to small adjustments into how much volume you're applying, you can adjust your walking speed or your pressure. But to make significant differences in how much volume you're applying, you'd need to change nozzles, because the nozzles indicate how much volume per minute you're putting out. Now, just a brief word about nozzles. The label recommendations typically will mention what type of nozzle you want to use for a given application. What I've found is for most foliar applications, a full cone nozzle or a flat fan nozzle will often give good coverage of covering the entire foliage that you need to treat for whether it be an insect pest or a fungicide you're applying. These nozzles tend to give very good coverage. Pinstream and hollow cone nozzles often don't give adequate coverage because they are giving very precise applications of pesticides. And if you are using a pinstream or a hollow cone to treat and you want to get full coverage, this can often mean that the applicator needs to handle the foliage and turn it over and actually be handling that and be getting pesticide exposures that way. And so we want to try to avoid that as much as possible. Now, other work practices that you want to get applicators in the habit of practicing are just, and this may apply to larger agricultural operations where you can afford to have wash stations in the field. This is an excellent practice to have if you can afford it, so that the applicators can wash up in the field before they have to use the toilet or before eating. Just, you want to really get them in the practice of washing their hands thoroughly before any activity, especially eating and smoking. Now, another thing that I really want to touch on is the importance of understanding reentry intervals. The reentry interval is stated on the pesticide label, and this is to prevent exposure to applicators and other people that may be in the field immediately after application. The reentry interval is the recommended time that the pesticide needs to sit on the crop before it can be safe for people to come back into the field without the maximum PPE recommended for that pesticide. This is critical that applicators understand this, because all too often, and if possible, it should be posted on the field so that this product has been applied, and the date, and that you're not to re-enter until this time. Now, if the applicator does need to re-enter the field for any reason during that period, they need to wear all of the PPE that they would be required as if they were going to apply again. So if that means full coveralls and chemically resistant gloves, even if they just need to go out there to pick something up that they left in the field, it's important that they get in that habit of wearing the PPE to go out, because they can actually be at more risk if they don't. Okay, I'm going to shift topics a little bit and talk about pesticide cleanup. And we talked a little bit about it in the mixing and loading portion, but now I want to talk about if there's a accidental spill while working, either with the mixed product or with the concentrate. Now, if you want to minimize the need for cleanup, this is, again, recommends IPM, because if you're using smaller volumes of less toxic pesticides, the consequences of having a spill can be less severe. If you're using small 500 milliliter containers or several liter containers, the consequences of one of those spilling is far less severe than if you're using a large drum or using a very highly toxic pesticide. Ideally, if you have dedicated mixing areas, if a spill occurs in that area where you have cleanup supplies, or an area where it isn't as critical if a spill occurs, cleanup can be made easier, and you can deal with it in one place. I always tell people, have a plan in case of a spill long before a spill happens. The last thing you want to be doing is wondering what to do in the case of a spill. Now, regardless of the size of the spill, it all follows the same cleanup procedures. You want to follow what's called the 3 C's. This is control, contain, and then clean up. Controlling just means stopping the leak. If it's a small container like that, it's no big deal. You just upright the container. If it's something like a punctured drum, you need to plug that and do whatever you can to avoid any further exposure to either you or the environment. So that may mean plugging that drum or tilting it in a way so that it's no longer spilling. If it's a large pesticide like a truck, get to a shutoff, and always keep yourself safe is the most important thing. If it's not something you can safely handle yourself, keep yourself safe. Then contain it if necessary. With a large volume of pesticide spill. You may need to use containment booms. If those are not available, you may dig soil into place to try to help contain that pesticide spill. And then once it's controlled, it's contained, then you can start to think about cleanup. With very small volumes of pesticide, or with large volumes, you may be able to reclaim some of that pesticide. If you can do that in a safe manner and reuse it, that's ideal. But a lot of times you can't reclaim it, especially if you're using soil as an absorbent. If the rest you soak up, clean with rags, and prepare to dispose of those rags. But if you have a large amount of contaminated soil, what you can do is dig that up and put it out on tarps and leave it in the sun, and let the sun, the ionizing radiation of the sun, help break down those pesticide residues. This is, of course, not an ideal situation, but I recognize that in developing countries, there may not be a better disposal system. So just letting the sun destroy those pesticide residues is a useful tool. Now, in terms of cleaning up the applicator and the workplace, it's important to clean the equipment and put that away after use. But the most important thing is keeping the applicator, getting them cleaned up. Ideally, if you can change out of the application PPE in the field or in an area away from the home, change out of those clothes and leave them for further work. Clean whatever gloves and PPE that is reusable and store that safely out of the sun. The whole idea here is you want to prevent bringing pesticide contaminated clothes home to your family. Ideally, keep the applicator clothes separate from the family clothes in separate piles, and then wash them separately. If applicator clothing is too badly soiled with pesticides, it's best just to discard them rather than try to clean them. But during just normal washing of applicators' clothes, wash them separately. Use hot water and soap, because those will help break down the pesticide residues. And then again, use the sun. The sun is the best source we have for breaking down pesticide residues. Now on to pesticide storage. Now here, even in the US, we have challenges getting growers to safely store their pesticides. Ideally, we would love to see all of your pesticides stored in locked cabinets, away from family and environment, something that even if a pesticide were to spill, it would be contained and it would be easy to clean up. We all know that the reality is that pesticides get stored in the home, oftentimes where children can get access to them, and that can create poisoning hazards. This is often done because these are valuable products and they need to be kept safe, but they also need to be kept away from the family, other family members, and also away from potentially getting into foodstuffs or contaminating other things. Some of the practical solutions for storage, I recommend lockable animal cages, something that is small. You can, even if you do have to store it in a location where children may be accessible to them, put it in a cage and the pesticides and lock it up. There's also ways that you can lock cabinets by hasps or even padlocks, just to keep them physically away from kids that have no business touching them. Ideally, storing the pesticides in some form of plastic tub. So if something were to happen and the container were to fail, there'd be a secondary barrier that this pesticide could leak all it wanted to into this container, and it wouldn't just go all over the place. Also, ideally, if you can store pesticides outside the home, it's better than storing them inside the home. And in reality, a tent can be an acceptable alternative to storing them in the home if you can keep it safe. It's not going to be vandalized or something like that. But a tent will give it some protection from the environment, the elements, and can then keep it stored away from the family living space. Now, one of the biggest challenges in developing countries is pesticide disposal. There's been numerous surveys in developing countries that show that farmers often just discard used pesticide containers in waterways or in the field where they apply. And this can be a real problem because that can lead to long-term environmental and health effects. If these pesticides are leaching into the water source or contaminating the ground, eventually it's all going to make its way to the water, and that can cause both die-offs in livestock and fishes, but it can also get into the drinking water supply and harm people. But improving disposal of pesticides is possible. Again, this recommends IPM because if you're using smaller volumes of less toxic pesticides, you're going to have less to dispose of. I encourage farmers to just purchase just what they need so that they don't have a lot of unused pesticides that they need to store and then ultimately need to dispose of if they don't use them. Regardless of whether you're using IPM and you're using a lower toxicity pesticide, when you're done with a container, you need to clean that container out and then destroy that container. And for large jugs of pesticide, like the multi-liter jugs, that means triple rinsing them and then physically damaging these containers, cutting them open so that they won't be used again. And I recognize that this is a challenge because that's a valuable, usable container, but it needs to be understood that there are pesticide residues in this that absorb into the plastic that are not going to be able to be rinsed out. And that over time, especially if you were to use this bottle as a water container, over time, the heat from the sun and just the breakdown of that plastic, those pesticide residues are going to come out into the water. Even worse than using this for a water container would be to use it for something like cooking oil or some kind of oil that you'd eat, because many pesticides, because they're oil-based and they absorb into the plastic, when you were to store an oil in there, that would leach pesticides out of that plastic. So you need to clean these out. You need to destroy them. Small containers you can just simply crush. And then what to do with them. It's always difficult to, I can't in conscience recommend burning these containers because that creates another problem, but I understand that it does go on. The best solution would be to physically destroy the containers either through grinding or cutting and then burying them until there can be a better solution for taking care of this disposal. Ultimately, large-scale disposal requires some form of governmental involvement, and that can be a real challenge. In Africa, it's estimated that there's some 15,000 to 20,000 tons of obsolete pesticides that are being stored in various countries. This is being worked on. The UN FAO is working with other countries to find funding to dispose of pesticides in Africa. There's also attempts being made to get chemical manufacturers to support some of the burden of these pesticide cleanups, because many of you probably know far better than me that pesticide manufacturers have, quote, donated pesticides to various countries. And then those pesticides either were subsequently banned in the African country or were just allowed to expire before use. And now this is a cleanup problem for the host nation in Africa. And so the organizations like the FAO and at the UN are trying to get chemical manufacturers to bear some of the costs of cleanup. I was looking on the FAO site. They've got a very good website about their pesticide cleanup projects. And I understand that there are current cleanup projects going on in both Mozambique and Malawi right now. Now I'm going to turn this over to our discussion. And I welcome whatever questions you have, but I'd like you to think about just a couple of things. How is pesticide disposal conducted in your country? I'd be very curious to hear your feedback on that. And with your farmers and their level of label compliance, what are some of the obstacles to them understanding the labels? Is it illiteracy? Is it the fact that maybe the labels aren't written in their host language? Or I'm very curious as to what you see as the challenges with label compliance. So we'll turn this over to the discussion. I'll stop sharing my screen, and then we'll go back to the second presentation.
Thank you very much, Tim. And please either write your question or comment about pesticide practices in your country in the chat box, and I will just read those to Tim. Or then, you're welcome to also ask your question. There are so many of you, I might not always see if somebody's raising their hand, but I'm sure we will figure it out. So feel free to ask any questions, give comments on the topics that Tim just raised, or other topics related to safe application methods, safe disposal methods, and others that we have just covered.
I'm not seeing anything.
So let me ask a couple of questions
Of course.
while everybody's thinking. So, yeah. I think one big issue is, of course, the fact that the use of pesticides is currently so unsafe and dangerous in many of the countries where we work. But I think you have brought up, many very simple things to do, like, washing hands, if there's availability of water, or even bringing a container of water to the field when one is applying pesticides, or, wearing clothes that cover your legs and cover your arms, walking backwards, things that really require, relatively little. So I know this question might be difficult, but those kinds of simple practices that don't require PPE and don't require gloves and others, how much would you see that those could reduce the risks to humans from pesticide application?
It's difficult to quantify, but I think that the true value in starting to implement some of those practices, like regular hand washing and being aware of your direction of application, it starts putting it into the mind of the applicator that this is something that I have to work with, but there are certain things that I can do to minimize my exposure. And then it starts creating a culture of safety where they're more often thinking about it. And if you can get someone to wear long pants and covered shoes and avoid walking through the treated area as they treat, next season they may be more open to saving to purchase heavy gloves, and that, or if they own gloves, wearing them and putting up with the discomfort and the heat. And so it's really difficult to, I think that every little bit helps, but I think the big, once you get that barrier crossed of wearing long sleeve, long pants, covered shoes and gloves, that's where the true benefits start to accrue. Because ultimately, we're trying to reduce the physical exposures, right?
Great, thank you very much for that. And I will read some of the comments that have been written. Joyce Malasha, our country director in Zambia, says that the challenge is low levels of literacy and not understanding the active ingredient in the pesticide. Joyce, did you want to follow up on this or to explain more, or is this okay? And maybe Tim can just comment on it. Did you have something you wanted to say, Joyce?
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to talk about the labeling that Tim had talked about, like what are the challenges in your countries when it comes to labeling? So apart from the low literacy levels and farmers not understanding like the effects of the active ingredient in the pesticides, I think it also goes to the cost. Farmers would rather, especially smallholder farmers, they would rather go for the cheapest pesticide they can find on the market, regardless of whether it will be effective or what the negative effects are on the environment or even the people themselves. So sometimes it's about cost. It's also about not understanding like what are the effects of this active ingredient in this pesticide. So there are a number of reasons why, and some of them would rather go for maybe a brand that they've been using for many years.
Yep.
And if a company has to change, or maybe a new brand has to come on the market, it takes a bit of time for them to appreciate the new brand and go for it, because they are used to using this old brand that they know. It's about the comfort zone. It's very difficult for them to move out of their comfort zone.
Of course, it's that we are all guilty of that. And Joyce, in Zambia, who can the applicators and the smallholder farmers get education from? Is it pretty much just the agrovet dealers?
Yes, mostly it's from the agro dealers, but in some instances they can also get advice from the agricultural assistants. But then you would find that one agricultural assistant has to take care of like 5,000 farmers.
Yeah.
So they're not always going to give them that attention they need. So sometimes the farmers also just use their experience. They are like, they do their own experiments and they are like, oh, I used it last year, it worked. So probably even this year, it is going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot to overcome.
Yeah, thank you. And we have another comment here from Joshua Karuma from Zimbabwe CNFA. And I think this must be Amalima Local Project. And the comment is that when Tim spoke about disposal through burying, there is a need to avoid burying near water systems.
Absolutely, and I read that comment, and I should have made that more clear. Yeah, I hate the idea of having to bury this stuff anyway, but if it is going to be buried, ideally it's away from a water source, and with the goal of this being ultimately a temporary burying situation, that there will be some disposal plan in the future. I don't know how realistic that is, but it should always be, if you have to bury this stuff, do it in a manner that it's not going to be subject to being washed out or leaching into a water system.
Okay, and I think it is also from Joshua, another comment saying that labels in Zimbabwe were initially in English and this disadvantaged most communal farmers. However, for most dangerous pesticides, only master farmers were allowed to purchase these pesticides. So the language issue there coming, for farmers who only speak the local languages, do not speak that kind of the main language of the country, is there always.
Yeah.
Joshua, did you have something in addition to this?
Me or the commenter?
No, I was asking Joshua if he had anything else.
Yeah.
I do not hear anything. And Hassan, who is actually the Farmer to Farmer Country Director in Morocco, we are always very happy to have our partners here. So we are really happy about you being here. So he has a comment. I have noticed that farmers do not pay close attention to how long the pesticide will be active in the produce. They would then sell the produce while pesticide is still active. Mint is a good example. What would be your advice?
Yes, that's going to be the topic of my next presentation in a moment. But it's all you can do is try to, the label should state how long they're supposed to wait. And if you can get them to use I know that they want to harvest that product when it is going to be the freshest and get them the most at the market. And so they have that pressure to deal with. But if you can talk to them about changing that final pesticide application to something that is in the PursueUp that has that will meet their needs, but has a shorter pre-harvest interval, you may be able to get them to comply with that, because some of the shorter acting pesticides in the PursueUp, you can harvest them the day of application. It's a matter of getting the farmers used to using products that are going to have shorter efficacy time periods. And so, but that gets into what Joyce was saying about just the habit of farmers and overcoming that.
And thank you for that. And Marsha Johnson, who is another farmer-to-farmer collaborator from Jamaica, she's the country director there. She has a comment that farmers tend to just use the same dose rate for all chemicals due to inability to convert from metric dose rates on labels. If one farmer learns the proper dose, they will then follow, and this knowledge spreads.
Yeah.
And let me see, Hugh Tape, who I wasn't able to check where he comes from, it says the real challenge is that producers who buy the pesticides have no knowledge of the active ingredients. How can they make sure that such products are authorized?
If I understand what you mean by authorized in that, I think that may take education of agrovets, and that may actually be a better use of the, as Joyce was mentioning, the agricultural educators. They may have 5,000 farmers, but if they can get some allies in the agrovets and start to explain some things to them, they may be able to pass that information on to the farmers. I know that may not work very well, because the agrovet may have his or her own interest in why they're selling a particular product. And it's difficult to sell. You're selling people on education rather than what's maybe cheapest and least harmful. So it's a real challenge. But I guess I'd ask, what do you mean by authorized? Authorized for the pest they're trying to treat?
Hugh, would you like to? Yes, yeah, that was the. Go ahead, Hugh. So I think the answer is yes.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, that is just it's an educate, and maybe it's again educating the agrovet to understand that this active ingredient is meant to treat this type of pest, and that needs to be passed on to the farmers.
Good. And I wanted maybe just to read the 3 remaining comments here so that Tim can go back to the presentation, and there will be a chance to ask more questions then after the second part of this presentation. So Mohsin Raza from Pakistan asks that he would like to ask about the incineration technique for disposal, as it would disintegrate the dioxins and furans, meaning the carcinogenic materials. So that would be one question. And then Guillermo Chiambiro from Zimbabwe Farm Project asks, what is your advice regarding breastfeeding women being pesticide applicators? And then finally, maybe a comment from Joshua from Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, labels do not have the REI.
Okay.
So, Tim, would you be able to just comment on these before you would continue with your presentation?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, Mohsin, your comment about incineration, yes, ideally incineration is the best way to get rid of the worst of the carcinogens. However, that's not the same as simply burning pesticides and pesticide containers. Incineration is burning them at much higher temperatures where those dioxins and furans and molecules like that do disassociate. My concern is that if people are burning small amounts of pesticide waste or even pesticide containers in bonfires or burn pits, that is what that is doing is it's decomposing the containers, but it's burning it at a slower rate, and it's only breaking the containers down into something that is less visible but no less dangerous, and in many cases more dangerous because it's volatilizing these products at lower temperatures than the temperatures needed to disintegrate them. So yeah, I am all for getting incineration programs going, but they need to be high temperature incineration programs. Now, the question about breastfeeding women being pesticide applicators, if it can be avoided, I would recommend it be avoided, just simply because of the need for routine breastfeeding and the risk of picking up even small doses on the body and then transferring that to the infant, but also the chronic exposure of if the mother is not wearing sufficient PPE, that she may be absorbing residues that are being transferred to her infant. If it can be avoided, that would be better. But I recognize that people need to do what they need to do.
And then there was the comment about Zimbabwe labels not having
that's unfortunate and frustrating. If the agricultural educators have access to the internet, those recommended REIs should be available through the manufacturer's website, or even a competitor's website. The formulations for many of the pesticides are going to be similar enough that if you can find a formulation recommendation for a given active ingredient, the REI, it's better than nothing. So ideally, if you can find the specific formulation that you're working with, but if you can find another one online, you at least should have some guidelines. And this brings me to another, just something I would thought of. If any of you have photocopies, scans of, or even pictures of some of the labels in your country, even in your country's language. I would love to get some copies of those. So I'll include my email at the end of this, and you can, if you would send me some of those, I would really value that, because I would love to see a Zimbabwe label and just see what that looks like. So that would be, I would appreciate it if you could, any of you could help me out like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. There was one question that came still in before we continue with the presentation. And this was from Guillermo Ciambiro again from Zimbabwe. And he asked if farmers can wholly adopt this IPM in cattle spray dipping practices without complications.
Great question. And I'm going to tell you right up front, I do not know enough about cattle to even begin to talk about what IPM in cattle looks like. So I apologize for that, but I wouldn't even attempt to say what that looks like. So I apologize. And with that, I'm going to get back to the, I'm going to share my screen again and go back. Where's there is share. Okay. Now I'm going to jump into the next part of the presentation. And this is just a brief 5-10 minute or so, but I want to talk about pesticide residues on crops. This is something that was brought to my attention when I was working with the Nepalese, that this is a real challenge that they're finding with in their markets, that produce is being brought to market with residues, significant pesticide residues on it. And as one of the commenters mentioned with mint, that it can be a problem in your host countries as well. Several scientific studies in the last 10 years have shown that many vegetable crops are making it to market with unsafe residues. This one I pulled out from 2016. It found that more than 10% of the produce randomly sampled in the market were coming back with significant residues that violated the country's standards or the European maximum residue levels. And this can be a result of several different types of residues, whether it be residues of banned pesticides like organophosphates and things that aren't permitted to be used on those crops, or residues of acceptable pesticides that were just applied in too heavy a dose, or because the pesticide or the product was harvested prior to the pre-harvest interval being up. I apologize. This can, the most common reason is that farmers are not following that waiting period, and they're harvesting these crops too soon. And we all know that banned pesticides are being used in our countries. It's still a problem here in the U.S. to some extent, that but banned pesticides do continue to make it into the country, into your country, and get used because farmers know that they can work. But then the real problem is that these products are being harvested and they're still making it to market. Now, the high concentrations, they can cause acute illness, but this is not as common a problem, because if there's a pesticide residue on a crop that is significant enough to cause an illness from consuming it, that is something that's going to be made aware of to the public. You know, there may be a odor or a flavor change as a result of it, or just because there are illnesses that occur, the word gets back to the market, and you know that the seller will be identified of like, okay, we got this here and we got sick. So those acute illnesses don't occur as often. The more concerning problem are the chronic effects. When you've got small residues that the consumer doesn't know are on the crops, and they're eating them, and then over time they're having long-term health consequences, things like cancer, mutation, reproductive effects, if neurological effects. If a breastfeeding mother were to be eating these contaminated products and then feeding her infant, that can pass on to them. And this really concerns me because this is like a long-term national health crisis, that in these countries that these residues are building up and people are getting exposed to, and it is going to cause problems 20, 30 years down the road. And so we really need to do something about it now. And we can reduce some of those residue risks by just drilling into the farmers the importance of honoring the pre-harvest intervals. And as I said in the comments a few moments ago, it's a challenge because the farmers, they want to harvest that crop when it is the most saleable and they can get the most for it. And they're dealing with market pressures and environmental pressures of when to get this plant out of the field. This recommends IPM education because there are plenty of pesticides on the Pursuops that have zero pre-harvest interval timing, so that you can harvest that plant the same day that you apply, because some of these pesticides are that benign. But there's also plenty of them that have 3-day pre-harvest intervals. Some of the hottest pesticides, ones that are most toxic, some of these have 30-day pre-harvest intervals. And I can imagine those are being violated all the time because if it's a product that is really effective at controlling a certain pest, there's going to be an incentive for the farmer to use it and then still harvest. But we really need to educate the farmers not to do that. But the most important thing that we want to get consumers to do is to wash their vegetables and produce when they get them home. Typically, just a warm water soak and rinse can be helpful. If need be, a very small amount of a detergent that, just a drop in a couple of liter container of water, just to lightly soak them, and then rinse them very well. Peeling the fruit and vegetables can be very helpful to removing those pesticide residues. At the governmental level, it's recommended that governments increase testing of produce in markets and then enforcing those residues. As much as the farmer may be motivated to get that crop out of the field early to get it to market, losing the entire crop because a government official says this is a dangerous residue, that's a valuable lesson, and so that can change attitudes. The governments can also continue to decrease the use of organophosphate pesticides, which are really the most harmful residues that are being left on some of these plants, and enforce the bans on these banned pesticides and help avoid them coming into the country. So this is what the government level can do. But this winds us all up that part of what I've been trying to do with this presentation is emphasize practicing good pesticide safety protects everyone. It protects the applicator that is in the field applying, protects their families and the crop, and ultimately the public from unsafe residues in produce. It can protect the non-target species, the beneficial insects that are helping control crop pests, ultimately protecting the environment. I recognize that getting farmers to pay attention to these broader challenges can often be the biggest hurdle to changing practices, but that's ultimately the goal. With ultimately, I want to help keep your countries safe, healthy, and clean. And so that's the end of the second. I said it was brief. In this discussion, I'd like to, I really want to know do farmers in your areas understand the waiting periods, the pre-harvest intervals? We talked a little bit about it with the mint question. And are people concerned about pesticide residues in foods? When I talked to the folks in Nepal a couple months ago, I was impressed that at the applicator level, at the farmer, at the public level, there's a lot of concerns about the residues on food. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about the folks in your countries. And with that, I thank you for your time. And I will stop sharing my screen so we can go back to the discussion. Where is it?
Thank you very much, Tim. And we have one comment here. Maybe I can, while others are thinking about questions and responses to Tim's questions, I will just read this out aloud for you. And this is from Evelina Batalha from Casa do Agricultor. So in Mozambique, the main challenge is the knowledge about the right products to use to manage pests. They are using in common sense, and our challenge at Casa do Agricultor is to guarantee technical assistance to advise the right combination. Now I managed to lose my combinations, rotations, and right use of pesticide. It is all about low costs. We have developed a project of pesticide application that includes the agro dealers and training around some associations just to reduce this negative impact on using pesticides in an incorrect ways and manage correctly the disposals. So that was a comment, and then Joyce from Zambia has said farmers understand the waiting period, but practicing that is the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
So we had a comment and a question.
Yeah. Well, I didn't see a question. There were two comments, but the Evelyn, the about Mozambique. Okay, it's the right products to use.
It's more of a comment, actually,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, and it sounds like that is a good model to follow, and that may be the model to follow in other countries, to educate the agrovets to help push that information out into the public. And I don't know how to get more of that started. It takes funding to get that type of project going.
Good. And then Joyce's comment was that it is that the waiting periods are understood, but the problem is practicing those. And then she continues on crop residues. Since the effects are not immediate, most people, especially in the rural areas, do not really care much.
Yeah, I kind of thought that was likely the case. It's very hard for people to get concerned about something that is unseen and is going to affect them 10 years down the road, when they have much more immediate concerns, and it's difficult to get them to see that.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And while we are waiting for more questions and comments, I can ask maybe a couple of questions here. One is the issue of, storage temperatures. In many of the countries where we work, the temperatures in the storage, in wherever that pesticide is being stored, the temperatures can be extremely high. Mm-hmm. And could you maybe discuss that a little bit? And Another issue is then, there was a reference to banning certain pesticides, and typically that happens in a country when it is realized that a particular pesticide is in fact, really dangerous. The carcinogenic impacts are there at a level that is not acceptable. But then I have heard say that really the safest way to get rid of the banned pesticides is to use them. That, the safest way, for example, to ban a pesticide is to say, we are going to ban this, and you will have a year or two to use up all these stocks that you have. So would you mind maybe commenting on those two issues, the issue of temperature and then the issue of the banned pesticides?
Yes, and taking them in reverse order, I do think that that is one of the best ways in terms of banning. It's the most efficient way. I don't know if it's the best way. I think it's the most efficient way, because you can impose the ban, say after we are stopping sales immediately. If you have the product in your stock, you can still use it. I think that placing a deadline, you have 2 years to use that, would be better than just saying as long as you have it in your stock, you can use it. Because here in the US, we ban pesticides that way, where we say, okay, if you have a compliant label, you can still use that pesticide. And so, there are I've seen containers of DDT that no one's actually still using. They keep it around more for historical sake. But, that's a bad example. DDT is a bad example. But chlordane, for example, that if they have a label for it, they could technically still apply that. So I think that the banning has to come with use what you got, but you need to use it by within 2 or 3 years. And that's a good method for getting rid of the pesticides. As far as the temperature concerns, the manufacturers, first, it recommends using smaller, if you really are concerned about what the temperatures are going to be like in storage. It recommends for purchasing and using smaller volumes of pesticides. But the manufacturers of these pesticides they do a lot of testing to ensure that the pesticide is going to maintain its efficacy, even if it's stored in conditions that are not, that can get quite hot. Of course, there's a limit to that, but the manufacturers, I've seen some of these testing facilities that they formulate them in a way that then they go store them in high temperature situations for months at a time, and then take them out and do efficacy tests and also quality tests to see if they're maintaining the correct formulations. And so manufacturers do their best to make a product that is going to be stable in the country that they're selling it. So.
Good. Thank you very much. And we've had quite a few questions come in here, so I will just quickly read those, or comments and maybe questions. So farmers understand the HI, but how do we help farmers who need to travel a day or two to the market and sell produce when in good quality? On pesticide residues, how can we mitigate residues of systemic pesticides as opposed to contact pesticides?
That's a very interesting question about the taking into account the travel time for getting to market. I can't recommend that you violate that harvest interval to account for the shipping time, because whatever is happening, even if it's in the back of an open air truck, that's not the same thing as those residues blowing off in the field. that's one of the thorny problems, that this is more than just it's a logistics problem as well as it's an economic. I think that if it goes back to changing the pesticide that the farmer is ultimately going to use, moving to something that is going to allow them to harvest the crop when they want and get it to market when they want, but then they may have to use a product that may not give them they may have to apply the product more often so that they can meet the harvest interval that will get them to market and be able to sell that. On the residues.
Good.
Well,
you had something else. Please go ahead.
It's the how can we mitigate residues of systemic pesticides as opposed to contact insecticides. Really, I don't want to say this for all, but for the most part, the pesticides that are systemic have far lower mammalian toxicity than the contact insecticides, and I suspect that the concern about residues on produce really are of greater concern for the contact insecticides rather than the systemics, because things like neonicotinoids that are going to be systemics, those are relatively benign in humans, and they're also going to be present in far smaller concentrations as a systemic than as a let's say a pyrethroid or organophosphate that's going to be on as a contact insecticide. So I'm not as concerned about mitigating residues of systemics as I am about the contact insecticides.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Adel from Pakistan says that in Pakistan, issue is the off-label use of pesticides. If any farmer sees the benefit to use irrelevant ingredient he recommends to others, just based on his personal experience, that's due to low rate of literacy. The other thing is people's concerns about residues in vegetables, but farmers are not practicing. They use pesticides and sell their produce very next day to the market.
Yeah, and this was something that I became aware of when doing the Nepal work, that sometimes they'll actually apply the pesticides post-harvest to keep insects off of the produce at market. It's an inadequate response, but it just takes, it's going to take education of those farmers from the agricultural educators. We need to do whatever we can to get to those people that you said that if a farmer sees a benefit and he recommends to others, we need to get to that farmer that other farmers are listening to and try to convince him, and and make that steady small progress. And I recognize that it's an inadequate answer, but it's all I've got.
Yes, thank you very much. And then we have a question from Zimbabwe again. The best way to deal with this would be to adopt good agricultural practices. But where standards are not demanded and governments have no capacity for testing and enforcing safe food standards and regulations, the challenges are likely to persist. In addition to what my colleagues have already said, in Zimbabwe, we have the additional challenges of illegal imports due to porous borders. Pesticides that come into the country this way are usually cheaper for farmers.
Yeah, I'll let that stand as a comment. I absolutely agree that the good agricultural practices are the way to go. But if we have no government to enforcement of some of these rules, we're trying to sweep back the ocean, because we do need some teeth to the rules that we're trying to impose, and that's just an unfortunate reality.
Good. Thank you. And anyone else, would you have a question? Please also raise your hand if you rather talk instead of type the question or comment in the chat box. Maybe, I think one thing that, occurred to me during your presentation, when we think about, again, this kind of simple and cheap ways to try to improve the safety of pesticide use, was the kind of the simple ways just to repair the sprayers, for example. Having trainings of farmers on, how it is that they could kind of fix the small problems that I think many of us, or all of us, have often seen with like backpack sprayers, just, the substances leaking out of them, or the nozzle not working properly. So, something, pretty simple and cheap, and can result in much safer use of the pesticide for the farmers.
Was that a question, Marietta?
No, it was just a comment,
Okay,
I think,
sorry.
of something kind of just
I
thinking
agree.
about.
Yeah. And I was, as you were saying, one of the things that I would love to get in the hands of farmers is what we call here filter tape. It's a nylon tape that you can put on fittings, and it just tightens things up, and it works wonders to seal minor leaks, because you just wrap the threads and screw it down, and it can revitalize an old filter or nozzle body.
Great. Good. Thank you very much. I do not see any other questions or comments from the participants. Did you have some other questions, Tim, that you might want to ask now at the end of the second part of the webinar?
No, I'm good. I wanted just a little bit of feedback about the general concerns of the consumer regarding residues, and I got a couple of answers from that. And that was more kind of what I expected, that if people aren't, if it's not an immediate crisis, oftentimes people aren't, they've got bigger problems than, pesticide residues that may cause a problem in 10 years. But I think that there needs to be, at the governmental level, especially in these countries that have nationalized medicine, that if these people are going to fall ill, this is going to be a crisis in 10 to 20 years and needs to be thought about. And maybe that can help motivate at the governmental level to get these things to become more priorities. So, but that's all I've got. I really appreciate all of you. I see we've got some 45 people and I just really appreciate you all taking your time to join us today. And again, I make a request: if you've got images of pesticide labels from your country, or good and bad application practices, if you want to just shoot me an email, I'm putting my email in the comments right now. Feel free to send me an email. I will make this, Marietta and their group are going to do something with this video to edit it together to make it available to you. But if you're interested in getting a copy of my presentation, Remy asked for someone in one of the host countries wants to translate it into French and use it. And I'm absolutely fine with any of you using it, just as long as, you know, don't misrepresent anything I'm saying, then you feel free to use the information. I just want it to be useful to you. So thank you for your time, and we will maybe do this again. Maybe if COVID, we can find some solution, maybe we'll get to meet sometime in your country. That'd be really wonderful.
Thank you very much. And we had a couple of comments here still. We had from Marsha from Jamaica. Thanks for the idea of encouraging random testing at points of sale to enforce and encourage compliance. And then from Vadim from Moldova. Thank you for the presentation. It is good to learn how to protect ourselves from the use of pesticides, but I want to suggest that the next webinar to focus on how to reduce the use of pesticides by farmers globally to tend to grow healthy food, to reduce residues and maintain the environment. And we have many thank yous here. I think those were the only comments, but I think I can speak for all the participants, you know, and I think I haven't had a chance to count from how many countries the participants came, but I think it is at least 15 to 20 countries. So I think I can speak for all when I say these were really clear and, you know, to the point presentations and trainings on topics that are something that I think we all need to learn more about, and which is such a huge issue in the countries where we work. So I really want to thank you, Tim, for these two presentations that you did. And I think we have all learned a lot, and it's been really great to get together on this topic. And again, I would like to encourage everyone to use these presentations in your work, whatever country you are in. And, you know, so please let us know if you would like to have the recordings, and we will share those with you. There are no copyrights. This is all being done, I think, with, Tim's input, and any kinds of other costs have been covered by USAID. So there are no costs and no copyright to the products that are coming from this. We encourage you also to share if you decide to translate some of these. So please share those translations also with us at Farmer to Farmer, so that we can also share them further, and so that they would be available for others in those countries where that particular language is being spoken.
Yeah, I would love if someone is going to translate my PowerPoint presentation into one of the local languages or French. I would love to get a copy of it just to have. I think it would be cool to see. So thank you, Marietta. This has been really valuable to me. I've learned a lot in the process.
Thank you very much, Tim. So, and all the best, everyone. Good night for those for whom it is already late in the evening, and have a good evening, afternoon for the others.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I'm going to stay on and just answer a couple of these, and we will do that. All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll keep the meeting open longer in case anybody has any other questions, or if you'd like to receive these materials, please write your email address into the chat box. That'll be the easiest way for us to record it.
Definitely.
So we'll keep this open a few more minutes. Thanks, everybody.
Remy, thank you for all your assistance in putting this together. I really appreciate your promptness on getting back to me on everything.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. And I don't think we introduced Remy Chapeta from our CNFA headquarters and from the Farmer to Farmer project in Washington, DC. Thank you, Remy.
All right. All right, I'm going to sign off. Thank you, Marietta. I'm sure we'll email and talk to you soon.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Yes. Yeah. Bye-bye.